get started here. Probably going to do something remote or maybe even cancel, I'm not sure yet, on Saturday, as they'll still be having Move Fest going on and they're using this room. So, and it'll be more at the peak of it then. This is more like a almost preview night. No, when I start broadcasting, it stops screen sharing. Nice. What? I don't know what we'll do. We're not going to have it here, I don't think, because I'm pretty sure we'll end up trying to fight somebody for the classroom, and I don't want to even deal with that. So at a minimum, it'll be remote on Saturday. We'll see. All right, I'm going to make this a little bigger. I wish I could get rid of that sidebar. Let me cheat. Let me see if I can. I'm going to regret doing this. Oh, look at that. Oh, no, I broke it. All right. Well, let's get started. I'm going to post on here too, as usual. Teacher assistants today? I don't know. I saw Matt earlier, but it's just me right now. Maybe he had to get going. It won't be that hard anyways. Today, I don't think is going to be that bad. Today, what I want to talk about is let's do an introduction to HTML. So I know that Daisy just posted that they're going to be having a more extensive course for HTML and CSS. But I don't know if everybody's going to be able to make that. And, you know, I definitely want people to still have the basics of all of this. Yes. But it also be remote. Yeah. And so that'll probably dive into stuff a lot more, especially CSS. But you're going to need a basic understanding of some of this stuff no matter what. So I want to make sure that it's at least covered in this course too. Next Tuesday, I believe, or next Thursday. Next Thursday, I think right now we have scheduled for a guest presenter to come and talk about Git and GitHub. So sort of excited about that. They've got their own lab that they've used before to do this sort of training. So we'll see how that goes. But I definitely want to encourage anyone who can be here in person to be here for that so that we've got good engagement and it's just much more interactive. There any questions or anything people want to talk about before we get started today? All right. So today we're just going to be doing HTML, and I have tried to create some content for it, but honestly, when I was looking around, finding resources, you know, using different places to grab stuff for, I felt like this Mozilla documentation was just so much better than anything I was going to put together that it just worked better to go right through this. It's got small little hands-on exercises throughout to have you guys practice just a little bit. It covers a lot of different aspects, and it even has sort of a final project after you go through this section to really practice a lot of these different skills. So I think it's going to be easier to do this than trying to spin together my own content and maybe missing some things that might be more critical. Who has some experience writing or working with HTML? All right, a little bit. So who feels really comfortable with it? Like, I just feel really comfortable writing HTML stuff. Yeah. Okay. Good to know. Today is definitely going to be more on the introduction side, and this is my goal is to keep it as much purely focused on HTML as possible. Even though this tutorial that Mozilla has something where you do some layout using HTML at the end, I won't have it yet at the end of this class. Hopefully I can get something out tomorrow. I want to have you guys working on an assignment too, because one of the things I think would be really useful for us to start building if you want to continue working in this space or continue to build your experience and skills so that you can market yourself is to get together maybe a portfolio or something. And so I plan on putting together a very simple portfolio type page that won't really have much on it, but something for you guys to then copy. And what I'll do when I put that out is not give you access to the source code. I'll just give you like screenshots and encourage you to create a page that looks almost identical without using any CSS at first. The goal is to build these skills one on top of the other. So not starting with styling and immediately starting with just the HTML portion. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Does anybody know what HTML stands for? Hypertext Markup Language, right? All right. So that's, I mean, a little bit. Can you guys see this? Is this large enough? All right. If anyone's speaking up online also has any comments, somebody can just let me know because I won't get to see those. But yeah, HTML is just hypertext markup language. If you want to break down what that means so that it has some context, language is just like JavaScript or English. It means that it has its own structure, its own rules, it has meaning. The markup part, that's, I mean, it has meaning if you understand it, but has anybody maybe handed in a paper before, or, you know, in like a grammar class and you get it back and it's all marked out with like, oh, this needs to be paragraph, make this a sentence. That's really the same type of thing that's markup, because they're just marking it up saying here's context of what this should be. That's what HTML is doing as well, is it's markup saying this is the context, this is what this portion of this document means. So, and then it marks up text, hence hypertext, and then, or text markup. And the hyper part, that's the linking, which we'll get to talking more about. It doesn't seem as innovative now as when HTML was introduced, but it's really one of the core things that makes it more than just a static document or just a markup to lay something out. Everything in HTML, every thing that you work with is what's known as an element. So anything that you're working with in HTML, it's got it mentioned right here, is an element of some kind. And HTML looks like this, and probably everybody's seen something along those lines. So this would be an HTML element, and we'll see a better breakdown of this just down below. But that's an element, all the parts of that put together. For that element, the things that matter are you have to make a whole HTML element. You've got an opening tag and a closing tag for the majority of HTML elements. There are some, and we'll see some examples in a little while, where there's no closing tag. But any HTML element that has content that's not within that same element will have an opening and a closing tag. And the tags, which we'll get into the syntax of more, just delineated using this less than and greater than symbols, and then the content of the tag. And the closing tag, if you'll notice, matches the opening tag, except it has this extra slash in there, which designates that that's the closing tag for this opening tag. And anything that goes in between those two matching tags is going to be your content. Any questions on how that works? Just a basic concept. Also important, it doesn't matter. HTML is case insensitive with your tag names. You'll see a lot of old HTML. It used to be common to write it with all uppercase tag names, like title. Now the best practice is to just do everything in lowercase, all of your tag names in lowercase instead of uppercase. If you want a reason. I mean, there's plenty we could give, but let's just say that we're lazy and we don't want to have to hold the shift key to type uppercase characters. It's good enough. So that's really the core structure of every HTML element. Now, if you're following along, which I want you to be doing, hopefully you guys have this page up. This is going to be pretty simple, especially at first, but it's got a live editor built right into this page. I posted a link to it, by the way, in the Slack channel. There's a live editor or different live editors here to have you guys do some hands-on practice while we're going through this so that you can just get some of this ingrained if you haven't worked with any of this before. And this first section is just edit the line below, which is going to be right here in this text editable area. Wrapping the text, the content, if you will, with the EM and the closing EM tags so that you have an EM HTML element with some content inside of it. And this is a live editor, so as you put more content here, it shows up above whatever you're doing. It's going to go ahead and show up. Yeah, I mean, this one's pretty simple. Some of the ones that we get to in just a little while, we'll be putting more together. But if you've done that or you feel like you're already comfortable with that material and you don't need to practice that, let me just see a quick hand go up or a thumbs up or something so that I can know when it's a good idea to move on. And this, unlike mine, by the way, it lets you cheat, so they've got solutions to everything. Anybody done with this? Already feel comfortable with this? Feel like you don't need to do it? All right. So this one should be pretty simple to work on. The next concept to introduce here, specific to working with HTML, is the concept of nesting elements. And that's just, it's not very complex. It maybe sounds more complex than it is. You can put HTML elements inside of other HTML elements. So you can nest them inside of each other to create structure of different kinds. So the example they have here is you've got a P element. You can frequently think of this as paragraph. That's basically short for paragraph. And inside of that, you have this strong element wrapping the word very. And that's to emphasize very. It's so that pops out more than normal. The important thing to remember whenever you're nesting HTML elements is that you always have to finish one element, or you have to finish a nested element before you finish the outer element that it's nested inside of. So here, the strong element has to be closed before you close the paragraph, because this strong element is inside of the paragraph. This is an example of invalid HTML because it opens a paragraph element and it opens a strong element, but then it closes the paragraph element before it closes the strong element. And so this is invalid because the strong one has to be closed before you close the paragraph. Yes? So this is where, how do I want to say this? it doesn't necessarily mean bolding. The point of HTML, and maybe they didn't emphasize it enough at the very beginning, HTML is adding semantics to your text. So the point of HTML is to add meaning, to say what's the meaning of this. And then the browser will do some default styling based off of these elements. And that styling, for example, strong will be some version of bolding, most likely. But it's not really, HTML is not really telling you itself what it should look like. HTML is about the meaning of the document, not the appearance of the document. Now, as I said, there are some default stylings that get applied by a browser to give you certain appearance, but we'll get to it in one of our future classes. CSS, which is cascading style sheets, that's really what's intended to be the styling approach as opposed to HTML. And so you'll find, we'll get to some of them, they'll be mentioned just a little farther down. There's some HTML elements that are sort of named for styling. There's like a B element, which sort of implies bold, that has been deprecated because HTML used to intermix the concept of both styling and just meaning, and they've tried to separate those out so that it's more concrete. But there's still some legacy of that in the markup language itself. That's a good question. Any other questions right now? All right, so nesting elements, hopefully that makes sense. The next important aspect, and this is one that actually doesn't have the exact same meaning anymore. HTML has actually changed the names of this, but we all still talk about them this way because it's much easier to understand in the new naming. This is still just the way that we talk about it, which is block elements versus inline elements. So when you're talking about HTML, any given HTML element typically falls into one of these two categories. It's either a block level element, which forms a visible block on your page, right? Like a visible block here is, this is a visible block on my page. This bit of text is a visible block. So a block level element is sort of the structure of your page. If you wanted to, if we're looking at this page and maybe you squint or you make your eyes blurry, you begin to see certain blocks that pop out, right? That are just the structure. Those are, for the most part, created by block level elements. And block level elements can be nested inside of another block level element. So you can see, this isn't a perfect example, but if you want to say this whole thing is a block, then you also have these like bullet points that are sort of block level inside of it. But you're not going to nest a block level element inside an inline element. And inline elements are ones that, as it said, they're contained within block elements and surround only a small part of your text. So for example, that EM that we worked with before, or strong, those are inline. And that's because it's intended to convey some meaning about a chunk of your text, but not to also do some layout and some structure of it to say this is a whole block of content. So if we look at this example here, we've got 3 EM elements back to back to back, and then 3 Ps, which are block level elements because they're a paragraph. A paragraph is pretty much the definition of a block. And the layout, when you actually render it, is those EMs render right next to each other, all in line, hence why they're called inline elements. And each one of these, 4th, 5th, and 6th, even though this code has them on one line here, rendered as 3 separate lines in the actual browser, because it doesn't matter how you lay it out when you're writing the file. All that matters is what the HTML and parser understands it as. And it says, oh, each one of these is a block, so each one of those gets its own line. And that can be confusing when you see the HTML code and you're thinking like, why isn't this right next to that? I've got them on the same line in my code. But you have to realize, is it a block level element or is it an inline element that you're working with at any point in time? Any questions on that? So one that I think is a good question, at least, is like, what are block level elements and what are inline level elements? Which ones are which? And they've got a reference here for you. Again, this isn't a perfect terminology because they even have the note right here. They say, let me see, HTML5 redefined the element categories. While these definitions are more accurate and less ambiguous than the ones that went before, they are a lot more complicated than understanding block and inline. So we stick with those. I mean, that's really the language that people stick with too. But you can go find a reference. And for the most part, it's going to be stuff that seems to make sense, right? Like, what are block level elements? A navigation section is a block level element. An ordered list is a block level element. A list item by default is a block level element. That might be interesting, but an article, sure. I mean, that makes sense that that's sort of a block of something. A dialog box. Div is, we'll talk about this at some point, but this is really just, this is the generic block level element. So I told you HTML is conveying meaning about your document. So if you have a paragraph of text, you want to put a P element, you want to make it a P element, so wrap it with P tags. If you have something that you want to be a block, but it doesn't really have meaning on its own, you just say like, this is a block, div is the element that you're typically going to use for that. But you want to, when possible, use the ones that have actual meaning because it conveys something, not just to you, not just to somebody who reads this, but for example, anybody who's using a screen reader, anybody who's using something to help their accessibility of a website. If you have actual paragraphs in the document as opposed to just using divs to get your block level stuff, that will have meaning to their screen reader that will help it understand what's going on. And so they'll be able to use that to navigate the web page much better than if you used divs everywhere because it's easy. So trying to capture that semantic, the meaning of what your element is an important aspect of using the right HTML element. And let me show you, we're not going to be able to cover every HTML element in here. Here is a good list of them. And you'll easily see there's way too much to talk about in any given class. So we're just going to touch on some of these, and then they've even got deprecated and obsolete ones. We're going to be touching on some of the most important ones, but if you really want to understand HTML or you want to say, I'm not sure what the right element for this would be, you're going to have to go do some reading on what the different HTML elements are. Maybe look at that list and say, oh, do any of these look like they fit the context of what I'm working with? Are there any questions about block versus inline? All right. See how we're doing? Moving along pretty fast. So the next one, this is what I was saying before. Not all elements have a closing tag. Some elements don't have, if they don't have any content in between, then that element may be what's known as like a self-closing element. So this is a self-closing element. This is an image element. And an image element is how you embed images into your web page. And if I scroll all the way over in it, you'll see here's the, what is that? Greater than symbol, and here's the less than. So this is all one tag. This is also all one element. It's just an empty element. There's nothing else outside of what's inside of the element. And that leads us, this one also introduces the next section here, which is, we've got this source thing here, which looks like it points to some sort of URL. What is that? That's what's known as an attribute. So elements, any element can have attributes. And usually there's a predefined set of attributes that you work with. There are rules for adding your own attributes to HTML elements. But there's a set of ones that are pretty common and defined in the spec as valid attributes on your HTML elements. So for example, class is pretty much a valid HTML element or element on any HTML, or attribute, sorry, on any HTML element. And attributes allow you to convey extra information about what you want to do in your HTML. So a class is usually used for either styling. We talked about, well, how do you get bold or how do you get other things? A lot of times class will be used to style, and we'll get to that when we talk about CSS. But it might also be used for JavaScript or some sort of programming language, almost always JavaScript, to look for certain content on your page. Oh, anything that has this class means something. So imagine you're creating, and we might do this for the React course, imagine you're creating a to-do application. You may put a class at the top level of each to-do item, whatever that HTML element is, it says to-do item as a class value. And then your JavaScript can go find all of those easily. That's an example of something that you might use your class for. The way you add an attribute to an HTML element is just a space, the name of the attribute equals, and then the value. And they'll have a note here about space or quotes. Just always quote your attribute values. And you can use either double or single quotes, whichever one works. The key part is if you need to use quotes inside of your value for some reason, which I'll show you in a minute, you need to use the other type of quotes to quote it. But that's really all that matters. So another example of an element that uses attributes is the A element. And an A stands for an anchor. It's a little weird what it's named. But basically, that's how you put a hyperlink into your document. And so we were talking about, we did HTML. We talked about it's a language, it's markup, text markup. A hyperlink is that last part. That's the hypertext part. That's what lets you go from document to document on the internet from anything that you have. And an anchor tag is how you put those into your HTML. And a lot of times, well, if you want your anchor tag to go somewhere, I'll say you need an href attribute on it. So that's a hypertext reference. It's saying where does the user go when they click this link? And then there's other attributes that are valid on it. You can give it a title as well. And when you give it a title, that's actually what shows up when you say hover over it, for example. So let me see. It looks like they didn't give this one a title. Oh, there we go. See, they gave a title on that element, and you saw that text pop in after I hovered over it long enough. That title is another nice, useful accessibility thing, and it can also be used by the browser to accomplish that tooltip. And then another attribute that you can put on an anchor tag is a target. And if you specify a target of _ blank, then whenever somebody clicks that link, it's actually going to open in another tab instead of in the same tab that you have open already, for example. So we've got another hands-on here, which is just choose a web page you want to link to, choose your favorite website, and make this text here a link to that website by following the instructions about how to create an anchor element. So just wrap that text as an anchor element, include the correct attributes for it that it specifies, and make the text link to whatever website you want it to link to. Again, if you already feel comfortable with this, this is easy, or you don't feel like you need to do it, let me just see a hand now. And once you get it working, let me just see a hand as well. Feel free to talk with each other too if you're stuck on any of it, or ask me a question if you need any clarification. Does anybody have their text linking somewhere yet? No? Your browser's out of date? Oh no. You don't know what the admin password is, right? Did you try admin? Always try the obvious answer. Sometimes it works. I could make some references to a really geeky hackers movie about what passwords you should try. But has anybody seen the movie Hackers? Nobody? Oh man, you guys are missing out on a gem of a horrible early 90s movie or mid 90s. I don't even know. It does, however, have a good techno soundtrack, so it's got that going for it. All right, anybody have their link working yet? Yeah? Few people? Anybody stuck on it? How do you separate the attributes? No, you separate them with a space. Just space? It's a good question. Yep, you separate your attributes with a space. All right. Let me give it a shot. You guys can watch me try and fumble through this. We'll see if it works. So the first thing I'm going to do is just wrap it with this anchor. So now it should think that it's a link, but you notice it doesn't have the standard link behavior, and that's because I haven't told it where it goes. So now I'm going to add this href. Oh, look at that. Now it already looks like a link, but I haven't given it a value. So let me put in a site for it to go to. At this point, it's actually working as a link if I clicked it, but I want to accomplish all of the bits that they have here. So let me look at the other two. Let me give it a title. Title equals in shoelace site. And they said give it a target of blank. That way it'll open in another tab. So now if I hover over it, I should see my title. And if I click it, I should open in another tab. Awesome. There you go. This is like a gem of 90s internet. Figure out how to tie any type of shoelace that you want to tie, any type of knot, any type of crisscross of your laces. So that's the key there. You're at just space separate your attributes. And that's also why the space separation of attributes is why it's important to always quote your attributes. Because we talk about Boolean next. We'll see it in just a second. But now let me just skip down there. So it says you can omit quotes on your attributes. Like here's an example where they didn't quote the link. But because it's space separated and that's what has meaning to the browser, in this example here where they have like an href and then they try to have the title be the Mozilla homepage, once it gets past the, it sees a space and says, oh, Mozilla is another attribute and homepage is another attribute. And so you just want to put quotes around it to protect yourself from ever having that situation happen, right? Just don't even bother being able to make that mistake, and you can protect yourself by using quotes. And while we're talking about quotes, I just recommend double quotes most of the time. And one of the reasons is because if you use double quotes, you can put single quotes inside of your attribute. So for example, in your title, if you need an apostrophe or a single quote, you can have it in there and it works. Whereas if you'd use single quotes, like it has an example down here, it's not going to work because it sees one single quote, then it sees the next one, and it says, oh, that's the end of that attribute value. Now, if you needed double quotes inside of your attribute for whatever reason, then you might want single quotes on the outside, but what? Well, if you need both, we'll talk about it in a second, maybe. You can escape characters. Let me see here. Is that on this page? So you can, it is, and I wasn't gonna get there just yet, but you can escape characters by using this really ugly syntax. So for example, if you had this text that you wanted to put on your page, this is a paragraph element, and you want to say, in HTML, you define a paragraph using the P element. It's showing you here, this is what that would look like if it actually rendered, which isn't what you expect, right? And the reason is because it doesn't know that this, you don't intend for this to be another paragraph. It thinks it is. So if you want it to actually understand that as just text that it should render, you have to, instead of putting the actual greater than and less than symbols, you have to use that ampersand LT semicolon, ampersand GT, ampersand less than, ampersand greater than. So that's basically an escaped character. And you can do that with, say, the quotes if you need to be able to use both. Is you can tell it, oh, I need a quote or I need an apostrophe here. It's ugly, it reads horribly, but it's the way that you have to accomplish that task when you need to do it. That's a good question. Any other questions? Feel free to ask questions all day. I want to hear more questions all the time.
Does it matter the nesting order? Like you nested the anchor inside the paragraph.
I nested the anchor inside the paragraph element. So again, that goes back to whether something is an inline element or a block level element. You can nest block elements inside of block elements, but you shouldn't nest block elements inside of inline elements. So if we were to, let me jump back up here for a second, and we've got our list of block level elements and inline elements. And if I were to just look, and some of this I just know from experience, the anchor is an inline element. So in other words, I shouldn't put a paragraph, which is a block level element, inside of an anchor, because the anchor is intended to be an inline element. So that's why I nested them that way. If it was two block level elements, like a div and a paragraph, then it wouldn't matter what the order was, as long as you made sure, again, that you closed your element. So you had your closing tag of the nested element before you had the closing tag of the outer element. That's the only thing that really matters there. That's a really good question. Any more? Yeah.
Is there a specific reason why first anchor 8 is an
Why the what?
first anchor 8 is an
What do you mean?
So at the starting, the paragraph and the anchor beside it.
It means less than, why is it only one?
Why is it not greater than?
Are you talking about in here, right here?
Yeah. Well, just at the starting.
I mean, it does. It's just way over here.
Oh.
The key there is the attributes for any given HTML element are in the opening tag, and the end of the opening tag is designated by this greater than symbol. So that's how you know, like, oh, here's my element, and the opening tag ends here, so any attributes are going to be inside of there. Good one. Yeah.
See, when it says show solution, they have like a period separating the two.
elements?
Yeah, they linked to just, it looks like they just wrapped one word with it instead of what I did. Is that what you're talking about?
So I guess it's not important to do it.
Or are you talking about something else? What did you say?
I might be wrong in the terminology. The less than, bracket A.
Uh-huh.
Greater than,
They put a period, well, they put it afterwards, right?
and then separate the.
Yeah, that's just the ending the sentence. Yeah, if you look here, that's just this little guy right there. It's just ending the sentence, that's all. So I just wrapped my whole thing, so I could change that instead and
Might be less confusing if you have like a longer sentence with like
yeah,
really long sentence where the link appears in the middle of the sentence.
right.
That'd be more obvious.
Like if I did this, and then I'm going to just move this period out and then I say more. That's really all it is just,
Well, the entity references that's something you put in when you write something out, right?
for the most part, yeah. It's when you need to escape something is the key. So for example, what they were showing before, right, is, I could do this down below, but I'll just do it here. It doesn't really matter. You see that suddenly it jumps to the line below when I did that P. That's because honestly, this is like sort of invalid HTML because basically what it says is I've opened two paragraphs. So I've got a paragraph and then I put another one here, but I didn't properly close them all. But browsers are really, really, really good at parsing bad HTML because there's a lot of it out there. I would say in the past, at least like 10 years ago, the majority of websites had bad HTML that was just wrong in one way or another. It's probably not always the case nowadays, but there are tons and tons of sites with missing closing tags, with all sorts of things that are wrong. And so browsers have gotten really good at just trying to figure out like, I'm gonna go ahead and just close this here. I'm gonna add something here to say this is the end of this paragraph. It seems like the right place. And that's basically what it's doing is I only have one ending of a paragraph, so it just doesn't know where to really end it. So if I wanted this instead to actually say what I want it to say, I need to do that whole escape, like less than. And you can see it's already fixed it, and that's because it can no longer read this whole thing as a HTML tag because I've escaped one of them. And the browser, once again, being really, really good at fixing invalid HTML, is able to render that even though it technically shouldn't be able to by the spec. By the spec, that's still invalid because I've got a greater than symbol there, which isn't allowed to be there. So I need to escape that, and then it's properly valid. But browsers are just really good at fixing all of those sorts of really bad mistakes that we make. Any other questions right now? These are good. All right, keep them coming, keep them coming. So there's another type of attribute as well. The ones that we've seen so far have values, usually strings, right? Some sort of text. There's also Boolean attributes, and those usually basically Boolean just means on or off, just like in a programming language. And a lot of times you'll see those written without any actual value for the attribute, because just defining the attribute on the element is the same as saying that it's true. Because usually like the attribute value to be in a state would be the same as the name of it. So for example, if you have a text input like this one here and you want it disabled, so I can click in this one because that maps to this, but I can't actually click and select this text input. And that's because it's got the attribute disabled on it. And this is really the same as this. It's just a lot easier to only write it out as just disabled, not having to put the rest there. So some attributes are Boolean like that, which have just a value. And another example is a radio button or checkbox has a checked attribute, I believe, which says this one is checked. And so if you put that on one of your radio options on a radio button, that's the one that's going to be checked. And if multiple of those have that, then it's going to, again, your browser is really good at dealing with bad HTML. It's going to see that and just say the last one that has the checked attribute is the one it's going to check. That make sense? What else we got on this first section here? So we've been dealing with just individual HTML elements up till now. Now let's talk about a whole HTML document. So this is how we put something together. So an HTML document has a few parts, at least one part that's different than any real elements, and then the rest of it, some special HTML elements that sort of have to exist. The first special part is this part up here, which is just known as the doc type. So if you're creating a HTML document from scratch, you just need just say this has to be the first line of it. Don't worry about why. The reason is because it tells it that it's an HTML document. It has more details down here if you want to read up more, but there used to be a lot of different versions of HTML, and each one had different rules about what was allowed and wasn't allowed. And so you would specify what version you had. So if you look at this, we've got this ugly long string sort of telling you what the HTML format or version is. And then the browser would interpret whatever your content was using that format. We've sort of just given up on that. We've got one format. It's just HTML5, and you just specify this at the top of your document. Is just a magic thing of saying this is just HTML. After that, you've got the HTML element, and everything in your document will be nested in this, commonly called the root element. It's just the root of your document. Everything else is inside of it. All of this indentation you're seeing is just for your and my sake. It doesn't have real meaning in HTML. And then the next two major portions that we have after this root element are the head element and the body element. And the key thing to just remember here is anything that you want to appear on the page goes into the body element. So anything that you actually want to render on your page, any content, is in the body element. The head element is, it's all this extra information about your page that isn't the actual content of your page. So if you're pulling in other files, JavaScript references, CSS, if you want to set the title up here in the browser so that it's got a title, if you want to give this some sort of icon so that you've got an icon up there, all of that's going to go in the head. But then the body is where all of your actual content goes. You can see them setting the title in this example, for example. Here we've got title, my test page. And that's what would then appear up here in your browser. Is it would say my test page, because that's your title. They also have this meta element. And this is just saying, you can put a lot of metadata in an HTML document that the browser will use to understand things, but it might also be used by, say, Google to try and understand what is this on this page, what's this page supposed to be about, so I can index it properly. This bit of metadata is just saying use the UTF-8 file format, which basically means, or a character encoding, which basically means you should be able to read just about any characters from any language. There's other character encodings that you could use that would, be specific to other languages or specific things, but UTF-8 is generally just the best to use nowadays. Any questions on the general layout of an HTML document? All right, this one we can't do inside of their tool, so I'm gonna move through it, but I definitely encourage you to, maybe go back and play with it, or maybe they do have it down here. I can't remember. Oh, they do. and maybe I'll take a short break, but this is another one where it says copy the HTML page above. And it encourages you to add some extra elements to this page right here. And if you don't want to copy it and do it inside of your own editor, you can work right here in this editor. You're just not going to have the whole HTML text, but everything that they're mentioning for you to work through is something that is visible anyway, so it can go right there in this little editor space. So go ahead and let me see what else we have here for a second first. You know what, let me cover these other two sections and then we'll go back and work on that because there's just a couple other bits here on this page. We'll talk about what's being said here and then give ourselves a few minutes to work through this, adding some content on this section up here. So the other two bits that we have on here, just talking about white space. HTML and white space works a little differently than you would expect, which is basically, if you see, what it says here is, you see these two examples, this paragraph and this paragraph, they're going to render exactly the same. Does that seem intuitive to anybody? Anybody think that makes sense? That those two paragraphs would render the same? Yeah. What? So what it will do is no matter how much white space you have, it will condense it to just one space. Now there's ways to get around that. There's, for example, there's an HTML element. Let's go look right now, which is called pre. I'm looking for it. Pre. The HTML pre element represents pre-formatted text, which is to be presented exactly as written in the HTML file. Oh, I want to care about the white space in this, so I'm going to put that inside of a pre element, and it's going to respect all the white space that I have. But normally it's not going to, so it's when these two render in your browser, they'll render the same, and all that extra white space will disappear. Any other questions on that? And you notice when I say white space, that even means this new line will disappear. Like, it's not going to have this on a line below. It's going to put all that together. Nope. Nope. There's an HTML element for that. If you want to say line break here, and that's the BR element, which stands for line break. So you would put that, that's an inline element. You would put that after R here, and then you would have a line break. So here, let me, let's just show that real fast, right? Let's, because I can always reset this, but you can see that it renders exactly the same. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter how many times now if I don't have any white space, well, there is a difference because it doesn't know where to put white space, right? It just knows that it collapses all that white space to one. But then if I did want there to be a line break here, I can put the BR element, and usually that's like done with this sort of self-closing behavior, but you can do it this way too. And now we get it on another line. Because all that element's saying is put a line break right where I put this element. Reset that. All right. Only other thing on this first intro page is just like you can do in JavaScript or any other programming language, well, most, you can put comments inside of your HTML. And the syntax for an HTML comment is you start it off with this less than, exclamation mark, dash, dash, and then everything until you have a dash, dash greater than symbol will be in the comment and it won't appear in your page. So you can see here, right, it's rendering this content and I'm not inside a comment appears and I am, doesn't show up. So if you're working on a web page and you want to comment something out for a little while because you don't know what's going on, is that what's causing my styling, my layout? Is that what's causing my error? You can comment out bits of code that way. Any questions on that? All right, then let's take a little while. Let me see where we're at. We can do like maybe 10 minutes if it takes people that long. To work through this exercise that we have here. So this one's just having you add some extra stuff in here, like adding an H1 tag, adding some strong around some text that you find interesting, adding a link to your paragraph, adding an image to your document. Ooh, a link to your paragraph. It may not actually have the information for exactly how to do that up above. Let me see. Don't have a link in your paragraph, but don't try and do a link to your paragraph. It didn't give you all the details for how to link to other text inside of your page yet. You know, add an image or something. When you think you're done or you feel like you got enough practice there, feel free to talk with each other too. Work together again. This can be a collaborative thing to work through this. We will get going again. What it'll be probably around 8:05. And I don't know how much more we'll go through today. We might break there. I was hoping to maybe go through at least one other section from their overview. I think I'm going to skip over the next one, which talks about content that goes into the head of the page, and just keep talking about rendering stuff. So a little bit more about some other rendering specs. Let me see here.
Yeah, I think this exercise. Like a body, create a title. It's right on there, section, access, learning. Well, you don't have. Oh, this one? Oh, this. Yeah.
Strong.
All right. How are people doing? Working through stuff still? Anybody having any problems? Yeah?
Yeah.
What do we got over here? Let me take a quick glance.
Can you add a strong element inside the header?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know if it's going to change the style or not.
It didn't change it.
No, actually, it hasn't gotten started yet. No, it's not really clear what to do. I'm good.
Okay. I'm not sure if it would actually change style or not. You can, and it has semantic meaning. But if you're expecting it to change the way that your content looks, that's a good question. I don't know.
It didn't. I did it.
Um,
But it did change the paragraph, so. It didn't change like boldness. Good, because the heading's already bold.
yeah, because the heading's already going to be bold, usually.
But it did change my
Yeah. All right. People feel ready to move on? Yes, no? Yeah. Yeah, let's go ahead and do it. So what do we have here? All right, I'll just do it on this page. I had a main title for the document. What should I call H1? All right, let's add a title. So I put an H1 there with something on it. Edit the paragraph content to include some text about something you were interested in. All right. There we go. What? It is true. Yeah, I'm not going to see it until next week. I know. All right, what else do we have here? Make any important words stand out in bold by wrapping them inside a strong. All right.
Other than those,
Today. I saw Shazam. I liked it. Saw Captain Marvel. Liked it. I didn't think it was amazing, but it was a good movie. You know. I'm not like my friend or my older sister. I love my older sister, but I can never take a movie recommendation from her. It's impossible because I've got a good friend who's the same way. It doesn't matter what the movie is, they love it. My friend's like, "Oh, Transformers 3, that was the best movie ever." Like that, you may as well have thrown a whole bunch of nuts and bolts in a dryer and watched it. No, it was awesome. Like, oh my gosh, this was the best movie. Garfield 4, great. I absolutely loved it. I appreciate that you like movies that much. I can't take your recommendations seriously. It just doesn't work. All right, let's see what else we need. I did strong, add a link. So let me see. There's got to be some sort of site for it, right? Here we go. We'll link here. So let me add a link to this. You'll notice I have a habit of making sure I close it first versus adding the attributes. That's just out of sort of habit of programming and knowing that I want to close my like brackets and other things first. So I added a link. I can add an image. I don't know. Let me find a good one. Seems like a good one. So I'm going to click on this thing and I'm going to copy the image address. Now, usually you don't want to hot link to somebody else's image. This isn't good practice to do in an actual web page, but this is just a web page for me and it's getting deleted in just a minute. The image one's interesting because we hadn't actually, oh yeah, we just barely mentioned how to add an image, right? We haven't done much with it. So let me add an image. Yeah. Got an image loading.
is that like 3 hours long or something like that?
It's gonna be like 3 hours long, yeah. Let me see if there's anything else. All right, I think that looks pretty good. Yeah. So it didn't require that much code.
When you put that together, you didn't worry about, like, it has to be, you go up to the enemy of the HTML document, and then where exactly where everything's in place, you just kind of put it all in there. And I was trying to see, okay, where in the body I should put something, where it says keep a paragraph, where I should put something. I was trying to like follow that.
I don't know. You can move it around, right? I mean, I can say like, ooh, I want this image to come first before the rest of my content. So if I cut that image out and then I put it, I don't know, let me put it here. Now it shows up before my text.
Your person might not have the head section and the document and
But I thought we, like, that was the format we always had last. So,
You,
I'm trying to follow the format of it, like,
you want to answer that?
I was gonna say, like, if you're gonna write an actual HTML document, probably want all that stuff, but since this code editor, to just read, whatever HTML code, not necessary,
Yeah, they actually mentioned that at the top of this. Because they say you can open this in a separate browser. And in that case, you need all of that content. But otherwise, they mention you can do it right here in their sample window. So. All right. Let me just take a poll. Let me see how people feel before we keep going. Do people want to cover another section, just talking more about some more HTML elements? Or you want to call it a day here and practice a little bit more of this yourself? What do you want to do? Go over a little more again? Anything specific? What? I mean, what I would really recommend is to read through this yourself again, right? That's another reason that using this is a great resource, because you can do all of this hands-on, work through it. If you do work through all of this, what I would recommend for this is sort of what we're going through. We did this getting started with HTML. I would recommend for now just skip over this what's in the head section. I mean, it's important information, but it's not what you need when you're first learning HTML. It's more important to learn how to add semantic meaning. So jump straight, that's what I would do, is jump straight to this like text fundamentals section as the next thing that you want to work through, because this is going to talk about headings and paragraphs. It's going to talk about, let me get down here a little bit, lists. How do I create lists of things in my document? And then it's going to talk about emphasis and importance. So it's really covering a lot of the same material again that we just did. It's just going into more detail about some of these different elements of how to use some of them, when you want to use them, etc. And a lot more hands-on working through exercises in line in the code here. So I think I would love to see people. I think what I would say is and you know what, I'm going to probably end the stream, but I'll still be here. So I'll stay until 9 when our class ends, if people want to stay here. And I want to encourage you, maybe we'll go over this if people really want to talk about it some more. Maybe I'll make some short videos on some of these little sections, but I want to encourage you to try to read through this page of their documentation and work through some of the hands-on examples. And if you're, have questions about it, you're stuck on anything, feel free to post in Slack or call somebody over to get some help while you're working through it. But there's some definitely good hands-on examples on this page that you can work through. So all right, I think I'm going to go ahead and end the stream for anybody who's on the stream, and then just work through this text fundamentals section of the documentation. If you have any questions, I'll be here. Don't know if Matt will be able to stay, but I'll definitely be here until 9 to help anybody out with any questions that we have. That way it'll be sort of hands-on working together section.